Hello, I'm immensely pleased. I've been away all day and I'm immensely pleased to come back and discover that my comments about Therese Kofi and her Catholicism have elicited such interesting responses. And I wanted to pick up a response from a person called Nicholas Peter. And he quite rightly points out that there's a discrepancy between Christ's teachings and the following and following the church's doctrine. And I think it's important to establish that in Catholicism, the church's doctrine, it's a church that defines the canon of Christian texts, and the church's traditions have priority in many ways over those biblical texts. It's the church that defined them. And this requires quite a lot of scholarship to back it up. I'm very happy to make a longer video about this because I think it's a very interesting subject, the canonicity of the Bible texts. And there are texts which are accepted by the Catholic Church, not by the Orthodox Church, not by the Anglican Protestant churches. There are texts in the so-called Old Testament, the earlier canon of biblical texts, which are accepted by Catholicism, not by Orthodoxy, not by Protestantism, and vice versa. And so there is still debate about which texts belong in the Christian Bible, and it took many centuries for these texts to be accepted. They were, of course, written in one language and, for the most part, understood in another. Most of these texts were written in Greek, based on sayings, presumably given by Jesus and his disciples in Hebrew or Aramaic, and they are often recorded in Latin and then translated into English. So the idea that there is a discrepancy between Christ's teachings and following the church's doctrine is perfectly reasonable. Which one does one follow, Christ's teachings or the church's doctrine? Well, that depends very much on the denominational bias. Catholicism tends to favour the church's role in defining how one understands Christ's teachings, and the biblical texts are therefore a tool towards that understanding. But the church, the Catholic Church, would regard the biblical texts as something that are defined and guided by the church, not the other way round.